They said Elias Morgan was a fool. They said he would die alone on that cursed land, talking to the wind and waiting for ghosts that would never come. But what they didn't know, what nobody in the whole territory understood, was that Elias Morgan had already lost everything a man could lose. And when you've got nothing left to lose, you become something dangerous. You become free. It was the summer of 1887, and the Texas sun was merciless. Elias stood on his porch, watching the horizon shimmer like a fever dream. His ranch wasn't much. 40 acres of dust and determination. A cabin his father built with his own 2 hands, and a well that still gave water when you asked nicely. But it was his. The last piece of his family's legacy. The only thing standing between him and becoming just another forgotten name in a forgotten land. "Gulger," he called softly. A magnificent black stallion emerged from the small stable, his coat gleaming like polished obsidian, despite the dust that covered everything else. Shadow. That's what the name meant in the old tongue his grandmother had taught him. The horse moved toward Elias, with the grace of smoke rising from a campfire, nuzzling his shoulder like an old friend. "You're the only one who doesn't think I'm crazy, aren't you, boy?" Shadow snorted, which Elias chose to interpret as agreement. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. And please, write in the comments where you're watching from. It truly makes us happy and helps us create more stories like this one. Now, you need to understand something about Dry Creek, Texas. It was a town built on promises and broken dreams. 50 years ago, they said there was gold in the hills. There wasn't. 30 years ago, they said the railroad was coming through. It didn't. The only thing that ever came to Dry Creek was dust, disappointment, and a man named Cornelius Barrett. Barrett arrived 15 years ago with a leather satchel full of money and a heart full of ambition. Nobody knew where his fortune came from, and nobody dared to ask. Within a decade, he owned half the territory, the general store, the land office, the water rights to 3 rivers. He wore suits shipped from San Francisco and boots made from leather softer than a whisper. And he wanted Elias Morgan's land. Not because it was valuable. Not because there was gold or oil beneath those 40 acres. No, Barrett wanted it because Elias was the last holdout, the last rancher who wouldn't sell, the last man who looked Cornelius Barrett in the eye and said a word that Barrett hadn't heard in 15 years. No. That single word had started a war. A quiet war. A patient war. The kind of war fought with paper and patience instead of pistols. Barrett had bought up Elias's debts from the bank. He had convinced the merchants in town to stop selling him supplies. He had spread rumors that Elias was dangerous, unstable, a man who had lost his mind after losing his family.
The truth was simpler and sadder.
3 years ago, a fever had swept through the territory. It took Elias's wife, Maria, in the spring. It took his daughter, little Rose, before the summer ended. He buried them on the hill behind the cabin, where the wildflowers grew thick every April. He planted a wooden marker for each of them, carved their names himself, and made a promise.
I will never leave this land. I will never abandon you.
That promise had become his prison and his purpose.
The afternoon sun was beginning its slow descent when Elias noticed the dust cloud on the southern road. 3 riders, moving fast. He recognized the lead horse immediately. A painted mare that belonged to Samuel Pike, Barrett's foreman. A man with small eyes and a smaller soul. Elias stepped off the porch, but didn't reach for anything. He simply stood there, arms crossed, waiting. The riders pulled up 20 feet from his fence line. Pike stayed mounted, looking down at Elias with the kind of smile that had no warmth in it. "Morgan," Pike said, tipping his hat with exaggerated courtesy. "Mr. Barrett sends his regards." "I'm sure he does." "He also sends a reminder. Your debt comes due in 30 days, $1,200. Pike paused, letting the number hang in the air like smoke. That's a lot of money for a man with no cattle, no crops, and no friends.
Elias said nothing.
Mr. Barrett is a reasonable man, Pike continued. He's prepared to forgive the entire debt. All you have to do is sign over the deed and walk away. He'll even give you $50 for travel expenses. You could start fresh somewhere else. California, maybe. They say there's opportunity out west. For a long moment, Elias just stared at the foreman. Then, slowly, deliberately, he uncrossed his arms and pointed toward the road they'd come from. You see that horizon, Pike? Pike glanced over his shoulder, confused. That's where you're going to ride, right now. And you're going to tell Barrett the same thing I told him last month, and the month before that, and every month for the past 2 years. He stepped closer to the fence, and something in his eyes made Pike's horse shift nervously. This land is not for sale, not today, not tomorrow, not ever. Now get off my property. Pike's smile faltered. For just a moment, something like respect flickered across his face. Then it was gone, replaced by cold amusement.
30 days, Morgan. Enjoy them.
The 3 riders turned and disappeared into the dust. Elias watched them go, his hand resting on Shadow's neck. The horse pressed against him, solid and warm and real.
30 days, Elias murmured. Well, boy, we've faced worse odds.
But as the sun set over Dry Creek, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold, even Elias Morgan wasn't sure that was true. The night came slowly to Dry Creek, like a tired traveler dragging his feet across the desert. Elias couldn't sleep. He never could when the wind blew from the south, carrying whispers of memories he tried so hard to forget. Maria used to love nights like this. She would stand on the porch, her dark hair dancing in the breeze, and tell him stories about the stars. Stories her grandmother had taught her. Stories from a world older than Texas, older than borders, older than the hatred that divided people into us and them. He missed her voice more than anything. Around midnight, Shadow started acting strange. The stallion paced in his stable, snorting and stamping, his ears pointed toward the eastern hills. Elias knew that behavior. Shadow sensed something. Someone. Easy, boy, Elias murmured, grabbing his lantern. Let's go see what's got you so worried. He walked into the darkness, following Shadow's instincts more than his own. The lantern cast a small circle of golden light around him, pushing back the endless black of the Texas night. Crickets sang their ancient songs. Somewhere far away, a coyote called to the moon. And then he saw him, a man, collapsed at the edge of Elias's property. Face down in the dust, arms stretched forward as if he had been crawling, desperately trying to reach the well he could probably smell from miles away. His clothes were torn, his long black hair matted with dirt and sweat. But it was the feathers woven into a small braid that told Elias everything he needed to know. Apache. Now, most men in Dry Creek would have walked away. Some would have done worse. Ridden into town, gathered a group, come back with rope and hatred and fear dressed up as justice. That's what happened in the West. That's what people did to those they didn't understand. But Elias Morgan was not most men. He knelt beside the fallen warrior and gently turned him over. The man was young, maybe 25 summers, as the Apache counted years. His face was weathered by sun and wind, but there was strength in his features. Nobility. This was no ordinary traveler. Elias pressed his canteen to the man's cracked lips. Drink, he said softly. Slowly, you're safe now. The Apache's eyes fluttered open, dark eyes, deep as wells, filled with confusion and something Elias recognized immediately. The desperate will to survive. The young man drank, coughed, drank again. Finally, his gaze focused on Elias's face. Why? He whispered in English, his voice rough as sandpaper. Elias smiled sadly. Because somebody should. It took all of Elias's strength to carry the man back to the cabin. He was tall, muscular, clearly a warrior in his prime, but days without water and food had left him weak as a newborn colt. Elias laid him on his own bed, the bed he had once shared with Maria, and spent the night caring for a stranger. He made broth from dried beef and herbs. He cooled the man's fever with wet cloths. He talked to him through the long hours, not knowing if the Apache could hear him, not caring if he couldn't. My wife used to say that the desert doesn't take sides, Elias murmured, watching the sunrise paint the cabin walls orange and gold. It challenges everyone equally, the rich and the poor, the settler and the native. She said the only way to survive it was to help each other. The Apache's eyes opened. Your wife, he said slowly, his English careful and precise. She was wise. She was everything. A moment passed between them. The kind of moment that doesn't need words. Two men who had known loss, recognizing something familiar in each other's eyes. I am called Red Eagle, the Apache said, son of Chief Moonlight, leader of the Mescalero people. Elias nodded, showing no surprise. I'm Elias Morgan, son of nobody important, owner of 40 acres of dust and one stubborn horse. For the first time, Red Eagle smiled. It transformed his face completely, replacing the warrior's hardness with unexpected warmth. Your horse, he said, the black one. He watched over me in the darkness. He led you to me. Shadow has better instincts than any man I've ever known. Red Eagle closed his eyes, but his smile remained. Among my people, such a horse would be considered sacred, a spirit guide. Over the following days, something remarkable happened in that small cabin at the edge of nowhere. Red Eagle grew stronger, and as he did, he began to share pieces of his world with Elias. He taught him how to read the desert, how to find water by watching where birds flew at dawn, how to predict storms by the behavior of ants, how to navigate by stars that Elias had looked at his whole life but never truly seen. Your people see the land as something to own, Red Eagle explained one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. My people see it as something to belong to. We do not possess the earth. The earth possesses us.
Elias considered this for a long moment. Maybe that's where we went wrong.
Perhaps. Red Eagle turned to look at him with those deep, knowing eyes. But you, Elias Morgan, you are different. I have watched you. You talk to your horse as a friend, not a tool. You buried your family on the hill where flowers grow, so their spirits could dance with beauty. You carry grief, but you have not let it turn to poison. He placed his hand over his heart. Among my people, we would call you one who walks between worlds. It is a rare gift and a heavy burden. Elias felt something shift inside his chest, something that had been frozen for 3 long years. Red Eagle, he said quietly, what happened to you out there? How did a chief's son end up alone in the desert? The young warrior's face darkened with memory. That, he said, is a story for tomorrow. Morning came with the smell of rain on the horizon. Elias stood by the window, watching dark clouds gather over the distant mountains. Rain was rare in this part of Texas, precious as gold, welcomed as an old friend. But today, the coming storm felt different. It felt like a warning. Red Eagle sat at the small wooden table, his strength returning more each day. Color had come back to his face, and his movements had regained the fluid grace of a warrior. But there was something heavy in his eyes this morning, the weight of a story waiting to be told. You asked me how I came to be lost in the desert, Red Eagle said, breaking the silence. Elias turned from the window. Only if you're ready to tell it. A man should know who he has welcomed into his home. He gestured for Elias to sit, and when the cowboy settled into the chair across from him, Red Eagle began to speak. 10 days ago, I rode east with a message from my father, a peace message. His voice was steady, but Elias could hear the pain beneath the words. There is a group of settlers 3 days' ride from here. Good people, my father believed. They had sent word that they wished to trade, to live as neighbors rather than enemies. My father chose me to carry his response, an offer of friendship, sealed with gifts. Red Eagle paused, his jaw tightening. I rode alone, as is our custom for peace messengers. One warrior, one horse, no weapons of war, only symbols of trust. He touched the feathers in his braid. These marked me as an ambassador, sacred, untouchable. What happened? A storm. The worst I have seen in 20 summers. It came from nowhere. Wind like the breath of angry spirits. Dust so thick I could not see my own hands. My horse, frightened beyond control, threw me and ran into the darkness. I searched for him for 2 days. Nothing. Red Eagle's hands clenched on the table. Without a horse, I was lost. The storm had erased all trails, all landmarks. I walked in circles, searching for water, searching for anything familiar. By the 5th day, I had accepted that I would die. I made my peace with the spirits. I sang my death song. He looked up at Elias with something like wonder. And then I smelled water. Your well. I crawled toward it with my last strength. The rest, you know. Elias sat in silence, absorbing the story. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, tapping against the roof like gentle fingers. Your father, he said finally. He must be worried. More than worried. By now, he believes I'm dead. My mother will have begun the mourning rituals. My younger sister will have cut her hair in grief. Red Eagle's voice cracked slightly. They are suffering, Elias, because of a storm, because of chance, because the spirits decided to test me in ways I could not overcome. How far is your village? 3 days' ride, perhaps 4, with the trails as they are now. Elias stood and walked back to the window. The rain was falling harder now, turning the dust to mud, filling the air with the sweet smell of wet earth. He watched Shadow standing in the corral, unbothered by the weather, magnificent and patient. His father's horse, his last connection to everything he had lost. You could make it in 3 days on a strong horse, Elias said quietly. Red Eagle nodded. If I had a horse, but I do not. And there are none for sale in your town. Not to me, not to any Apache, regardless of the price. The truth of it hung in the air between them. Dry Creek would sooner shoot an Apache than sell him a horse. That was the world they lived in. That was the hatred that poisoned everything. Elias made his decision. Take Shadow. Red Eagle looked up sharply. What? My horse. Take him. Elias's voice was calm, certain, as if he were discussing the weather and not giving away the most valuable thing he owned. He's strong, he's fast, and he's smart enough to find water when there's none to be found. He'll get you home. Elias, no. Red Eagle rose to his feet, shaking his head. I cannot accept this. That horse is worth more than gold in this territory. He is your father's legacy, your only companion. Without him, you have nothing. I have my land. For how long? I heard you talking to those men. 30 days until they take everything. Without a horse, you cannot work, cannot travel, cannot escape. You would be giving me your life.
Elias smiled, and there was something peaceful in it, something resolved.
Red Eagle. 3 years ago, I buried my wife and daughter on that hill. I promised them I would never leave. I meant it. Whatever happens with Barrett, I was never going to run. He placed his hand on the Apache's shoulder. But you have a family waiting for you. A father who needs to know his son is alive. A mother whose tears need to stop. A sister who should not have to mourn. He walked to the door and opened it. The rain had slowed to a gentle drizzle, and the clouds were beginning to break. My father used to say that a man's worth isn't measured by what he keeps, but by what he gives away. I never understood that until Maria died. She gave everything to everyone, right until the end. It's the only way she knew how to live. He turned back to Red Eagle, and his eyes were bright with unshed tears. Let me be worthy of her memory, just this once. They stood together in the corral as the last of the rain faded into mist. Shadow seemed to understand what was happening. He nuzzled Elias's hand one final time, breathing warmth against his palm. Then, with a grace that broke Elias's heart, he allowed Red Eagle to mount him. I will not forget this, Red Eagle said, his voice thick with emotion. No Apache has ever received such a gift from a white man. You have given me more than a horse, Elias Morgan. You have given me back my family. Then go to them, and don't look back. Red Eagle nodded once, then turned Shadow toward the eastern horizon. The horse moved into a gallop, carrying his new rider toward home, toward life, toward a reunion that would have been impossible without one man's impossible sacrifice. Elias watched until they disappeared into the distance. Then he sat on his porch, alone, and waited for whatever would come next. The days after Shadow left were the longest of Elias's life. He had known loneliness before. After Maria died, he thought he had tasted the deepest depths of solitude a man could know. But this was different. This was the silence of a house that had lost its heartbeat. Every morning, he woke expecting to hear Shadow's familiar whinny. Every evening, he caught himself walking toward the empty stable before remembering. The horse was gone. Red Eagle was gone. And in 17 days, everything else would be gone too. Elias tried to keep busy. He repaired the fence that had been sagging for months. He cleared the weeds from Maria's grave and planted fresh wildflowers beside little Rose's marker. He organized his father's old tools, cleaned the cabin from floor to ceiling, and mended clothes he would probably never wear again.
But no matter how hard he worked, he could not outrun the truth.
He was a man waiting for the end. Word spread quickly through Dry Creek. By the end of the first week, everyone knew that Elias Morgan had given his horse to an Apache. The reaction was exactly what you would expect. Some laughed, calling him the biggest fool west of the Mississippi. Others shook their heads in disgust, muttering about race and loyalty and the natural order of things. A few, very few, said nothing at all, their silence speaking louder than any words. Samuel Pike rode out twice to check on Elias. Not out of concern, of course. Out of satisfaction. 12 days now, Pike announced during his second visit, remaining mounted as if Elias wasn't worth the effort of dismounting. Mr. Barrett wants you to know that his offer still stands. Sign the deed, walk away with $50. It's more than fair, considering your circumstances. Elias was sitting on his porch, whittling a piece of wood into nothing in particular. He didn't look up. My circumstances, he repeated. No horse, no money, no friends. Pike smiled his cold smile. Face it, Morgan. You're finished. The only question is whether you leave with some dignity or get dragged out like a dog. Elias kept whittling. A long curl of wood fell to the ground. You know what I've been thinking about, Pike? Can't say I care. I've been thinking about legacies, what we leave behind when we're gone. Now Elias looked up, his blue eyes steady and calm. Barrett will be remembered as the man who owned everything. But what did he build? What did he create? He just took. That's all he knows how to do. He blew the dust off his whittling and held it up. It was a small horse, rough but recognizable. My father built this cabin with his own hands. My wife planted those flowers on the hill. My daughter used to laugh so loud you could hear her from the road. His voice was soft, but there was iron underneath. That's a legacy, Pike. That's something real, and no amount of money can buy it or take it away. Pike's smile faltered. For just a moment, something human flickered behind his eyes. Then it was gone.
12 days, he repeated, and rode away.
The final night arrived like a thief. Elias sat on the porch until the stars came out, one by one, filling the sky with ancient light. He thought about his father, who had dreamed of building something permanent in this wild land. He thought about Maria, who had filled this cabin with music and laughter and love. He thought about Rose, who had lived only 6 short years, but had smiled enough for a lifetime.
I kept my promise, he whispered to the darkness. I never left. I never abandoned you.
He went inside and looked at the photograph on the mantel. Maria and Rose, captured forever in shades of gray and silver. Maria's eyes sparkled even in the old image. Rose was missing her 2 front teeth and grinning like she had just discovered the world's greatest secret. Elias touched the frame gently. Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know, I tried to be the man you believed I was. I don't know if I succeeded, but I tried. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat in his father's old chair, watching the darkness slowly fade into gray, then pink, then gold. The sunrise was beautiful, as it always was in Texas. The sky burned with colors that seemed too bright for such a heavy day. And then he heard them. Horses, many horses, coming from the direction of town. Elias stepped onto the porch and watched the dust cloud approaching. As it grew closer, he could make out the shapes. 30 riders, maybe more, led by a man in a fine gray suit on a white stallion. Cornelius Barrett himself. Beside him rode Sheriff Thomas Whitmore, a man who had once been decent before Barrett's money corrupted him. Behind them came Pike and the rest of Barrett's hired men, fanning out like a wave of inevitable force. They stopped 50 feet from the cabin, forming a semicircle that blocked any possibility of escape. Not that Elias had anywhere to go. Barrett dismounted slowly, savoring the moment. He straightened his jacket, adjusted his hat, and walked forward until he stood at the edge of Elias's property line. Morgan, he said, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air. Your time is up. I can count days, Barrett. Then you know this is over. The debt is due. The land is mine. He gestured toward the sheriff. I've brought legal authority to ensure a peaceful transition. Sign the deed now, and you can walk away free. Resist, and Sheriff Whitmore will remove you by force. Elias looked at the army assembled against him. 30 men, 30 horses, all the power and money in the territory, aimed at one stubborn fool with nothing left but his principles. He should have felt afraid. He should have felt despair. Instead, strangely, he felt calm. This land belonged to my father, Elias said. He built this cabin. He dug that well. He planted those trees with his own hands. My wife and daughter are buried on that hill. You can take the deed, Barrett. You can take the property, but you will never own what this place truly is. Barrett's face reddened with anger. Remove him. The sheriff sighed and stepped forward. Elias, don't make this harder than... But he never finished the sentence, because at that moment, someone pointed toward the eastern horizon and shouted words that made every man turn and stare.
What on earth is that?
The dust cloud on the eastern horizon was unlike anything Dry Creek had ever seen. It rose from the earth like a living thing, a wall of golden brown that stretched across the entire skyline. At first, Barrett's men thought it was another storm, the desert playing tricks as it often did. But storms don't move with purpose. Storms don't advance in formation. This was something else entirely. Riders, someone whispered. Hundreds of them. The semicircle of Barrett's men began to shift nervously. Horses stamped and snorted, sensing the tension in the air. Even Barrett himself took a step backward, his confident expression cracking for the first time.
And then they emerged from the dust.
200 Apache warriors, riding in perfect formation.
Their horses moved as one, a river of muscle and mane flowing across the desert floor. Feathers and beads caught the morning light, flashing like stars against the brown earth. They made no war cries, carried no visible weapons. They didn't need to. Their presence alone was a force of nature. At the front rode a figure that commanded attention without effort. He was older than the others, his long gray hair braided with silver ornaments, his back straight as an arrow despite his years. His face was weathered by countless summers and winters, carved by wisdom and sorrow and strength. Even from a distance, there was no mistaking his authority. Chief Moonlight had come, and beside him, mounted on a magnificent black stallion, rode Red Eagle. Elias felt his heart stop. Shadow, his father's horse, his last companion. Here, now, in this impossible moment. The Apache riders flowed around Barrett's men like water around stones, never touching, never threatening, but making it absolutely clear who controlled this situation. Within moments, the 30 hired guns found themselves surrounded by 200 warriors who simply sat in silence, waiting. Chief Moonlight raised his hand, and the entire assembly stopped as one.
The silence that followed was deafening.
Slowly, deliberately, the chief dismounted and walked toward the cabin. Red Eagle followed, leading Shadow by the reins. The crowd parted before them. Barrett's men, the sheriff, even Barrett himself stepping aside without conscious thought. They stopped in front of Elias. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Chief Moonlight studied the cowboy with eyes that seemed to see everything. Every loss, every sacrifice, every quiet act of courage that had led to this moment. Then, to the shock of everyone watching, the chief placed his right hand over his heart and bowed his head. Elias Morgan, he said, his English slow but clear. I am Moonlight, leader of the Mescalero people. You saved my son when he was lost. You gave him water when he was dying of thirst. You gave him shelter when the world offered only danger. He paused, letting the words settle.
And when he needed to return to his family, you gave him the only thing you had left. Your horse, your father's legacy, your last friend in this world.
Chief Moonlight raised his head, and his eyes were bright with emotion. Among my people, such a gift creates a bond that can never be broken. You gave my son back his life. Today, we give you back yours. He turned and gestured toward the horizon. From the back of the Apache formation, riders began moving forward, and with them came something that made every person present gasp in disbelief. Horses, 50 of them, wild mustangs with coats of every color, black as midnight, white as snow, brown as the earth, spotted like autumn leaves. They moved together in a flowing herd, magnificent and free, representing wealth beyond anything money could buy. These horses are the treasure of our people, Chief Moonlight announced, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. We have never given such a gift to anyone outside our tribe. But you, Elias Morgan, are no longer outside. From this day forward, you are a brother to the Mescalero. Your enemies are our enemies. Your land is under our protection. He turned to face Barrett directly. This man's home stands on sacred ground now. Any who threaten him threaten us all. Barrett's face had gone pale. He looked at his 30 men, then at the 200 warriors surrounding them. The mathematics were simple. The choice was obvious. "This isn't over," he managed to say, but his voice had lost all its power.
Yes, Chief Moonlight replied calmly. It is.
Red Eagle stepped forward and placed Shadow's reins in Elias's hands. "He missed you," the young warrior said with a smile. "Every night, he would look toward the west and wait. He knew you would need him again." Elias couldn't speak. His throat was too tight, his eyes too full. He pressed his forehead against Shadow's neck and let the tears come. Tears he had been holding back for 3 years, finally released. Sheriff Whitmore cleared his throat awkwardly. "Barrett, I think we're done here. The debt, well, seems like Mr. Morgan has the means to pay it now, several times over." Barrett said nothing. He simply mounted his horse and rode away, his men following in shameful silence. They would not return. Everyone knew it. Some victories are too complete to challenge. When the dust settled, Elias stood on his porch, surrounded by Chief Moonlight, Red Eagle, and the warriors who had saved everything he had. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. Chief Moonlight smiled, the first smile Elias had seen on that weathered face. "You already did. The night you chose kindness over fear. The moment you saw my son not as an enemy, but as a man who needed help." He placed his hand on Elias's shoulder. "The world builds walls between people. You chose to build a bridge. That is rarer than gold, rarer than horses, rarer than anything." Red Eagle nodded. "My father speaks truth. You taught me that honor has no color, no tribe, no border. Now we teach Dry Creek the same lesson." Elias looked out at the 50 Mustangs now grazing peacefully on his land. He looked at Shadow, returned to him against all odds. He looked at the Apache warriors who had ridden 3 days to stand beside a stranger. And for the first time in 3 years, Elias Morgan laughed. It started small, just a chuckle born of disbelief. But it grew, filling the morning air, mixing with the wind and the sunshine and the impossible miracle of this moment. He was not alone anymore. He never would be again.